From the fireplace to your place, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat on ABC News and News Radio. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz Chidello.
So much happening this week, Chaz. Lots of election news, an impending VP announcement, the latest on the COVID pandemic, including a rather sad high-profile death today. America's economy, meanwhile, has suffered its biggest three-month contraction in history, GDP crashing 9.5% from April to June.
And we're also going to be looking at the controversial role of the Department of Homeland Security in the federal intervention in Portland and elsewhere with a former top official. John Cohen is our guest.
Now, a cynic might suggest that knowing some appalling economic data was on the way and to maybe cut into a news cycle otherwise dominated by Biden, VP, chatter and the funeral of John Lewis, earlier today, President Trump decided to tweet another one of his weapons of mass distraction.
With universal mail-in voting, not absentee voting, which is good, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote.
That's right, the president has done what many feared, suggesting a delay in November's election, which of course, as he cannot do without the agreement of Congress, and Congress will not agree to that. It provoked predictable outrage. It's unconstitutional, it's impeachable, again. And he followed it up with a demand that the result should be known on election night. But that's not likely to happen, at least not if it's a close result, because tens of millions of votes will still be coming in. In some states, postal votes just have to be postmarked on election day, November the 3rd, to count, and that could be a week or two later, depending on how the United States Postal Service is being funded at the time. It is hard to imagine it taking months and months unless the courts are involved, Chaz. And as for that threat from Trump that it could take years to determine, that would only be happening if now former President Trump is still rage tweeting from Mar-a-Lago saying, I was robbed. What do you think of this?
Look, I'm not so optimistic that it's going to be done in a week, I have to say. Like New York, for instance, their primary, as of last week, it was 5 weeks from their primary. Some of their precincts still had only counted like 5% of the ballots. And there are going to be many, many more ballots than in the election than there are in primary. So I personally think it could well take a month. It's not going to take years.
Yeah.
But having said that, when are people going to learn? You talk about the cynical view. I think the real cynical view and the realist view is that Trump doesn't think about his tweets. He just tweets out anything, anytime. And we get so excited about each tweet. He's already forgotten it. He's moved on.
Except this is not a one-off. This is he has literally dozens of times questioned the legitimacy and the safety of mail-in voting. He doesn't want to expand the franchise to include people that are likely to cast mail-in votes, even though statistically it's more likely to be an older Trump voter, an over 65, who's going to be wanting to put in an absentee postal ballot rather than everybody else. But clearly he's wanting to suppress the vote and cast a pall over the possible outcome. Now, the big question to me that I just don't know the answer to is this just building in an excuse for losing? But that he'll lose and he'll accept defeat because the system will close ranks. Republicans in Congress will say, sorry, Mr. Trump, time to go. Or are we actually facing some kind of like a dictator-like move to, declare the results invalid and declare himself president for life like President Xi has?
Okay, well, first of all, just to clarify, I was talking about the delay in the election thing. I don't think we should take that seriously at all. In terms of trying to smear mail-in voting, that is definitely on. There is no doubt about that. And the concern I have is that when you look at the polls, the vast majority of people who are going to vote on the day are Trump supporters, and the vast majority of people who want to vote mail-in are Biden supporters.
That's partly because Trump has been spending months casting doubts over mail-in voting.
Absolutely.
And also encouraging his supporters to go out there, don't wear a mask, circulate in the real world as if coronavirus isn't a problem.
I'm sure that's the case. And the concern I have is that even if Biden wins comfortably, on the night, Trump might be ahead.
Right.
And he may even declare victory. And then it will take 2, 3, 4 weeks before Biden moves ahead, even if he wins comfortably. And I'm concerned, I'm not worried about the President Xi scenario so much, but I do think that he's not just building an excuse if he loses, but he's building in potential trouble and an illegitimacy for an entire presidency.
And he was.
He might say that's payback for what happened to him, I guess.
And he was preparing this ground an excuse for defeat in 2016 as well. He would have questioned those results had he not won. He may have still wanted to question those results when he did win, but that's another story. My concern here is, and this is going to be something we're going to talk about a lot in the next 3 months, is that Donald Trump, even if he is declared to have lost the Electoral College and a new president is sworn in January next year, Donald Trump's not going away. In theory, he can run again in 2024. You can have 2 non-consecutive terms as President of the United States. I don't think we're going to be done and dusted with Donald Trump for some time yet. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is just days away from announcing his vice presidential running mate.
I'm going to try to figure out how to trick you all so I can meet with him in person. You got crews outside my house. I don't think it matters, actually. What I said was that I'm going to have a choice in the first week in August, and I promise I'll let you know when I do.
First week of August, that's next week. In the last couple of cycles, both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama announced their running mates the Saturday before the Democratic Convention started. Different Democratic Convention this year. So that's still the Saturday after next, but we're kind of in the ballpark at the moment. Still lots of names doing the rounds as being on this hypothetical shortlist. Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Susan Rice, Karen Bass, Tammy Duckworth, Val Demings, also some of the long shots that are still getting a lot of mentions. If Joe Biden picks somebody more progressive than he is, trying to get that balance going in the ticket, we can expect a lot more tweets like this.
Sleepy Joe Biden is just a Trojan horse for the radical left agenda. He will do whatever they want.
So obviously that is one of the risks of, say, picking Elizabeth Warren, a more progressive candidate. Of course, the other thing that to me is more compelling as to why it won't be Elizabeth Warren is if Elizabeth Warren is made vice presidential running mate, then the Republican governor of Massachusetts gets to appoint Elizabeth Warren's replacement, who will be a Republican. So the Democrats lose a Senate seat as well. So there are a couple of reasons strikes against Elizabeth Warren.
I would also point out that in 2015 there was research done into the effect black candidates have on the vote from black people, and they get 5% more turnout from black people in black congressional races. Now, whether that translates to 2020 presidential politics, who knows? But there is evidence in the past that it does affect the vote somewhat, turnout, and she's not black. so there is an issue there. Although I would say an advantage for Elizabeth Warren over I think, every other candidate, it should raise a lot more money. She raised $6 million just the other day in one session. She's got the small donors happening.
Yep.
And I think the rest of them are basically zeros for raising money, but she would raise a lot.
And she satisfies the Bernie wing to an extent of the party. A friend of the show, political scientist Tom Schaller, tweeting what I thought was a great point during the week when he observed a little appreciated fact of Biden announcing several months ago that his running mate was going to be a woman rather than just anybody at all. It immediately ruled Bernie Sanders out of contention. So we haven't had 3 months of, is it going to be a Biden-Bernie unity ticket? So he took that off the table. Tom Schaller pointing out that was really, really smart. But all roads seem to point to Kamala Harris in terms of she ticks the box. She's a woman of colour. She is from a state in California where there's a Democratic governor, so a Democrat will replace her in the Senate. Californians it's a big state with deep pockets. There's a lot of money to be raised there, big fundraising events and so on, even if they're being done online. But as we saw last week,
she could be president tomorrow.
She is seen as having run in the presidential primaries herself. She kind of meets that threshold test. But Chris Dodd, who we had on the show a couple of months ago at the start of this vetting process, there was a pretty extraordinary leak from him last weekend where he was saying the concern about Kamala Harris is that she showed no remorse for that full frontal attack on Joe Biden over forced busing to desegregate schools in the 70s. She showed no remorse and that she's perceived as too ambitious. Now, a lot of people like Democratic strategist Hillary Rosen saying, well, for God's sake, Chris, that's pretty damn sexist. You wouldn't accuse a male politician of being too ambitious or not showing remorse for a political attack in a political debate. What do you think of that? Is that, because it's very easy to double guess and triple guess these sorts of things, is that to give Biden cover to say no to Kamala Harris, or for Biden to be able to say, well, I've risen above all this, bygones be bygones?
There is certainly some campaigning going on in Politico in particular, and it's not very pro-Kamala Harris. I don't know what that means. I do think that the attacks on her for ambition agendaed, in my view. I don't see what's wrong with having an ambitious vice president in there. If it's in their interest, if they're ambitious, to make your presidency a success, because the thing that will determine whether they get elected president is if you do well. So that's a good thing if they're ambitious. It's a good thing if your vice president can stiletto people in the stomach during a campaign debate. That's a good thing. So I find those very strange.
The fear, I guess, is that on the one hand, a 77-year-old first-time nominee in Joe Biden needs somebody as their running mate who is ready to step in at a minute's notice, particularly during a pandemic. What they don't want is somebody who is basically saying, I'm going to pressure Joe Biden not to run for a second term in 2024 if he wins, and be essentially campaigning for the presidency from day one in the Oval Office, making Kamala Harris not a loyal and effective vice president to Joe Biden, but just president in waiting, trying to nudge him out the back door.
I think Joe Biden is not going to run for a second term. I think we know that already. He just is not saying it out loud because he can't. Exactly. So I don't think there's any incentive for Kamala Harris to be undermining him, to be honest. So I don't think, even if she is too ambitious, that should be a problem.
If she doesn't agree with something that he does as a hypothetical President Biden, it would be in her interest to pretty quickly start to distance herself. All VPs have to do it when they're going to take over the mantle. Al Gore had to start distancing himself from Bill Clinton.
Too much disunity, it hurts her.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'll ask you about was, in terms of whether she's already been picked, was, I'm not sure, did you see those notes that they took a photo of?
Yes.
Like, I've got a photo of it right here. These are the notes during the press conference. They were captured by AP Magnified. This is what they said under Kamala Harris's name. Do not hold grudges. Campaign with me and Jill. Talented, great help to campaign, great respect for her, which sounds like what you'd say about your vice presidential pick. But what people haven't noted so much is that right underneath that, it also said Department of Justice reform, the people's lawyer, not president's lawyer, highest qualifications, decisions on law and fact. And that is what you say about your Attorney General, John.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure it means anything.
Yeah.
But
look, it is important not to overread the tea leaves in all this, because that, of course, was the day after Bill Barr had appeared before a congressional committee and was was basically still there being Trump's lawyer, not America's head judicial officer. So, yeah, look, that was interesting. But it does go to a point that holding a grudge thing, this is where I almost feel as though Kamala Harris may have Joe Biden boxed in. Even if Biden is still stinging a bit from that attack on him last year, which apparently particularly Dr. Jill Biden, Joe Biden's wife, saw as a bit of a betrayal, given that Kamala Harris and their son Beau Biden had been very close as respective attorney generals of their states a decade ago. But Biden will look as though he can't let bygones be bygones. Kamala Harris ticks so many obvious boxes, unless there's some other disqualifying thing which we haven't heard of. If Chris Dodd really wanted to scuttle Kamala Harris, if he had something on her from all this vetting, it'd be out there. Reportedly Chris Dodd concerned that Kamala Harris's husband's business dealings were a problem, as there were for Jerry Ferrara in the 80s. We would have heard about some potentially black mark against her name. That isn't out there right now. So it seems as though this is setting it up to say, Joe Biden, what a unifier. He's forgiven Kamala just as he's able to forgive, people who voted for Donald Trump 4 years ago.
I agree.
All right. What about some of the other options, though? If it isn't Kamala Harris, Susan Rice has emerged in the last week or so. Former National Security Advisor and Ambassador to the United Nations under Barack Obama.
And she was a friend of Joe Biden's in the administration.
Apparently they worked well together during the National Security Advisor phase, when Biden was this almost like second Secretary of State during the time of both Clinton and Kerry. But the idea that Susan Rice, who has never run a political campaign in her life, would get thrown into running for Vice President of the United States with a debate against a seasoned professional like Mike Pence in October, it seems far-fetched. But then again, Donald Trump ran exactly one campaign and he won.
Yeah, Donald Trump was a polished media performer. Susan Rice, look, she's done some interviews, but running for a campaign, that's a big task. I think it's really risky. I mean, who knows?
Brings up Benghazi again.
Yeah, and not to mention she was National Security Advisor during the Ukraine thing with Hunter Biden.
Yep.
And she was part of the unmasking, like the Conservatives.
The architect of the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah.
It's safe to assume that if she's getting this kind of attention now, that she would be on the shortest of shortlists for Secretary of State.
Definitely.
If not Vice President.
Definitely. Also, by the way, she's quite conservative.
Yeah.
The left would not like her been vice president.
So there are a few other names. There's obviously in the sort of post-George Floyd Black Lives Matter resurgence of the last 2 months, not just female candidates, but women of colour have come to the top of consideration. Val Demings, Florida Congresswoman, former Chief of Police in Orlando. She performed very well in the impeachment hearings, I thought, last year and early this year. Karen Bass from California is another name that's being bandied around as well.
Yeah, I was going to say about Demings, that one of the things they say about her is that she's from Florida, and they say that could help you in Florida. But I think it's a bit of a myth that the vice president can win the state for you. There was a great experiment back in 1988 when Dukakis picked Benson, who was, at that point in time, Benson ran I think it was senator in Texas.
Senator from Texas.
Yeah,
yep.
he ran again as senator for Texas while he was running for vice president, and he got 800,000 less votes as the vice president than he did as the senator. It just doesn't translate. And so I'm not sure that the Florida matters. With Demings also, you'd think maybe in this time of anarchists storming courthouses that the fact she was a police chief might be in her favour, but the Black Lives Matter people, they do not like her for exactly that reason. In fact, I think the quote was, when you're a police officer, you're not black anymore, you're blue.
Yeah.
So that could create problems in the Democrats.
Also a potential problem for Kamala Harris as a former prosecutor in California as well as State Attorney General, where she, like Amy Klobuchar, who basically recused herself in the wake of the George Floyd killing, she wasn't overly aggressive at prosecuting police officers accused of brutality. She was seen as potentially overzealous in prosecuting people of colour who were caught with small quantities of marijuana before it was decriminalised in California. So Harris is not a perfect choice, but it seems that, I mean, so far, unless we're looking at a Tammy Duckworth or somebody else that comes out of left field. Karen Bass, who's not well known, worth saying though, the interesting thing about her is that she's already said, I would not run for, if I'm made vice president, I would not run for president in 2024, whether Biden's considering running or not. So it would reinforce Biden as a transitional figure, a safe pair of hands, leaving the party to decide its own future in 4 years.
And the left like her too. But if she doesn't want to be president, that's the reason she's vice president, because Biden could die.
Yeah, right.
So I think it's a bad choice. Let me just say something controversial here.
Sure.
It doesn't matter.
What?
Like there was
Who the VP is?
Who the VP is. Like the Morning Consult had a poll out this week. Whoever he picked, Biden got 47% of the vote, except for Demings and Baldwin, he got 46% of the vote. It makes no difference whatsoever. Like the people vote for Biden, not for them.
I don't think it makes no difference at all. I think it is impossible to quantify what difference it makes. Some elections, yes, Lloyd Bentsen didn't win Texas for Mike Dukakis, but Mike Dukakis didn't win a lot of states in 1988. LBJ won Texas for Jack Kennedy in 1960. Sometimes a VP with a strong political machine, not just name recognition or a history in a state, can actually swing a close state. It has happened in the past. What it does more importantly, though, is it's not a geographical balance or even an ideological balance. You can reunite a party with a ticket, and a united party drives up turnout everywhere. And so if you have a person of colour who gets that extra 5% of black voters out, that is certainly very helpful indeed. And it also reassures people who are a bit worried about a lack of experience in some area or another, or a gender issue, in Joe Biden's case, another old white guy, for goodness sake. Okay, a woman on the ticket and a woman of colour helps to assuage a lot of those concerns about him, just as he made up for Barack Obama and his inexperience in 2008.
Look, that's fair enough. And I will also add, they can do harm. This is the old Richard Nixon adage from 1968. The vice president can't help you, he can only hurt you. And some might say Sarah Palin didn't help John McCain very much, for example, so they can hurt you. Having said that, Richard Nixon, that's his adage. Richard Nixon then went on to pick Spiro Agnew, who is possibly the most negative effect on a president ever. They even ran ads specifically against Spiro Agnew. I think we got one of them here. Okay, so Biden needs to not pick that.
Except Spiro Agnew served an important role for Richard Nixon in the 1968 election. Agnew, as governor of Maryland, had run a populist law and order campaign there, racially tinged law and order campaign in Maryland. He brought that to the national ticket in 1968. He helped Nixon to win. Nixon was seen as strong on foreign affairs, but not so good on domestic law and order issues. Agnew helped him win in 68, and he helped him win again in 72. It wasn't until 73 that we discovered that Spiro Agnew was a tax cheat who'd been taking bribes, or didn't contest the allegation he was a tax cheat taking bribes.
In that case, I accept your concession. I'm right. That doesn't matter. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, let's have a look at the polls. And Joe Biden has maintained a lead in excess of 8 percentage points in the average of national polls this week. And he is just above 50% overall. And we've talked about how important that can be, putting him in the box seat. 95 days until election day, although voting starts in some states in as few as 40 days from now. The swing states as well looking good for Joe Biden right now too. If you plug the state poll averages into the Electoral College calculator, Joe Biden would have won an election held this week in a landslide, 352 to 186, with Ohio and North Carolina shifting into his column in the last week. It is 270 Electoral College votes to win, of course.
Should say though, for the first time in a while, there's some polls that are tightening a little. Change Research had a swing state poll this week where things are getting a little tighter. Biden had a lead in Arizona by 2, Florida by 3, Michigan by 4, North Carolina by 3, Pennsylvania 2, and Wisconsin 5. And Morning Consult had a poll where Biden was leading by only 3 in Minnesota. So look, neither of those polls are super high quality, but yeah, 1 or 2 close polls are better than 0, John.
Yeah, absolutely. And the expectation is that all polls will tighten between now and November. They seemingly always do. What we don't know, though, is what happens in the month of August when we have the 2 conventions that are going to be virtual conventions where there is often either a kind of a launch pad or there's a bit of a jockeying. It's the leaving the gate at the start of the final stage of the general election. So it's going to be a fascinating period to see in the next few weeks or so. Federal officers have begun a phased withdrawal from Portland, Oregon this week, where they were sent by the Trump administration to either protect the federal courthouse or inflame a riot amongst Black Lives Matter protesters, depending on your point of view. They will be replaced by state troopers, although President Trump is also threatening to send in forces from the National Guard, which is basically America's Army Reserve.
By the way, it also depends on your point of view whether the federal officers are necessarily even leaving, because Oregon's Governor Kate Brown tweeted, "The federal government has agreed to withdraw federal officers from Portland starting tomorrow. All Customs and Border Protection and ICE officers will leave downtown Portland." But Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf then tweeted in apparent response, "As I told the governor yesterday, federal law enforcement will remain in Portland until the violent activity towards our federal facilities ends. We are not removing any law enforcement while our facilities and law enforcement remain under attack." And those forces don't seem to be going very far, John, because when Kate Brown was asked where the feds would be stationed in the transition period, she only replied, "They are leaving downtown Portland." Trump also implied this might be a temporary agreement, tweeting, "If the mayor and governor do not stop the crime and violence from the anarchists and agitators immediately, the federal government will go in and do the job that local law enforcement was supposed to do." So make of that what you will.
What I make of that, Jazz, is that President Trump is still drumming up a law and order campaign. How do I know that? This is how.
Law and order.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, it is. Now, tensions do remain high, not just in Portland, but in Ferguson, Missouri. Officials have decided today not to prosecute the police officer who killed 18-year-old black man Michael Brown back in 2014. That triggered months and months of protest, largely inspiring the Black Lives Matter movement. So we'll see how that plays out as well.
Yeah, that could not only create more problems in Portland, but Ferguson, Missouri might be the new Portland for all we know. So we'll see about that. I should say, by the way, all the other non-Portland operations are still ongoing, and there's a lot of them. Operation Legend, as they call it, is already in place in Kansas City, Chicago, Albuquerque, and it's apparently about to begin in Cleveland, Detroit, and Milwaukee. But those ones are different to Portland. It's not taking over the police's job. It's actually working with the police.
Yep.
And it's working on gang matters and crime, drugs.
Which could actually be welcome additional resources and powers when it comes to the involvement of federal officials as well.
Yeah, I think that's a real positive. Personally, I've got no problems with any of those operations.
But when you've got a situation like Portland where the governor is saying, OK, thanks very much, you've said you're leaving, and they're saying, no, we're not, that's a big, big problem.
It is. Oh, by the way, while we're talking about this topic, I should apologise for the latest stupid thing that I said.
Again?
Let's talk about the wall of mums. These were a bunch of mums in yellow shirts creating a barrier between the activists and federal agents in Portland. This was the clip in question last week.
Moms are here. Let's stay clear. Moms are here. Let's stay clear.
Look, I don't necessarily believe they actually are mums. I think a lot of them are just black bloc people who just wear a yellow shirt instead of black. But whatever, it's a good idea. Okay, so sometimes when you're talking off the top of your head, you say things you don't mean, especially if you're an idiot. So let me explain what I actually meant. I was referring to a few videos I'd seen showcasing apparent mums getting involved in trying to break into the courthouse, like this video here. Okay, so what I meant to say was I didn't necessarily believe they were all mums, because I'd seen evidence that some of them may have been black bloc types wearing a yellow shirt. I had no reason to believe there were any more than a handful of such people, though. Certainly not most of them, and I shouldn't have said otherwise, so sorry about that.
OK, so it was a slip of the tongue rather than trying to tar everyone with that brush.
Yes.
Fair enough. Let's get an expert opinion on all of this from John Cohen. He's a 30-year veteran of law enforcement, counterintelligence and Homeland Security. He was counter-terrorism coordinator for the Department of Homeland Security and an advisor at one point to Mitt Romney as well. He's now adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Mr. Cohen, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
Hi, nice to be with you today.
Tell us, how unusual is it to have federal forces being used in this way in what is clearly usually a local and state law enforcement issue?
The deployment of the federal personnel is not really that unusual. During periods of mass protest or civil unrest, it's not uncommon for federal law enforcement agencies to deploy to the cities impacted by those circumstances. But their role is typically limited to either protecting federal facilities and federal personnel or directly supporting the efforts of state and local law enforcement. State and local law enforcement have the lead in addressing the situation of the protest or the unrest. They developed a strategy. They work with the protesters. They seek to de-escalate the situation. So what's uncommon about what we're dealing with today is that the federal personnel that have been deployed are operating independent or have been operating independent of the state and locals, and that's caused a series of issues.
Yeah, as you say, federal agents are allowed to protect federal buildings, but where's the line between doing that and usurping the role of the police? And do you think that in the case of Portland, that feds have stepped over the line?
There are certainly concerns being raised by the governor of Oregon and by the mayor that they did. And the way to think about it is the federal personnel, their role is to protect the facility itself. So they can protect the grounds of the facility, they can protect the outer walls of the facility, and they certainly can protect the inside. The way I like to describe it is that they can arrest somebody for vandalizing a federal building, but they can't arrest somebody who vandalizes the restaurant across the street. So it is really the responsibility of the state and local police to deal with protest-related issues in and around the courthouse or around the court or the federal facility. It's the federal agents who are responsible for dealing with the building itself. Now, the one exception to that is federal law enforcement personnel can arrest somebody and can pursue somebody to arrest them if they witness them committing a crime that they have jurisdiction, and they can take steps to mitigate potential threats in advance as well. But really, the best way to think about it is that the role of the federal law enforcement officers is to protect the facility. The role of the local police is to deal with the protests.
And Mr. Cohen, as a veteran of the DHS yourself, are you concerned that personnel are being used kind of almost as props in these made-for-TV events, big shows of force, whether it was in Portland or previously in places like Lafayette Park?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been in law enforcement and Homeland Security for over 30 years. I worked as a police officer, a federal agent. I've worked for the Department of Homeland Security and other federal agencies. I've planned law enforcement responses to major protests and I've also coordinated federal personnel being deployed to state and local jurisdictions. The two things that concern me about what we're seeing today is first, the appearance that the federal personnel have been deployed to Portland are operating independent of the state and locals. That is dangerous for the law enforcement personnel who've been deployed, and it's also dangerous for quite frankly, those who are engaged in peaceful protests. If the federal officers aren't operating off of the same playbook as the state and locals, that can be a real problem. The other thing that really concerns me, though, is that some of the rhetoric coming out of Washington has been very political, very partisan. There's been very public criticism of the state and local officials. There's been an effort to frame those who are protesting and in many cases peacefully protesting as somehow being far left radicals or being associated with Democratic Party. That's dangerous as well because it makes the situation more volatile on the street, and it also undermines the potential relationship between the state and locals and the federal authorities. Again, that relationship, the relationship between the federal law enforcement personnel and the state and local authorities is critical. It's the only way that the protests and the civil unrest can be dealt with in an effective way, in a way that's safe.
So in recent days, we've seen the announcement of a phased withdrawal of federal forces from Portland. Do you see this particular situation coming to an end now, or could it flare up again?
I'm hoping this is the beginning of a de-escalation in Portland. There's some work that needs to be done to lower the temperature in that city. It's the summer in the United States. We typically see more violence. People are angry. There are protests that are continuing in cities across the country. It's really an important, from a law enforcement perspective, it's really important that law enforcement officials are working with those who are organizing these protests so that you can keep those that want to commit violence out of the picture and people can exercise their constitutional rights. But at the end of the day, these protests are only going to begin to go away when those who are protesting, those who are frustrated about the way people of color are treated by police, when those who believe that we need major reform in our law enforcement and criminal justice system, where they see that people are listening to them and people in government are taking their concerns seriously, and we begin going down the road to address those concerns. Until that happens, I suspect you're still going to see people who are going to go out in the streets and protest. And whenever you have mass protests, you have individuals and groups of individuals who want to use those protests as a way to, commit crime, engage in destructive behavior, or advance their own ideological causes that differ from the protesters, but allows them to engage in violence and destructive behavior on behalf of their ideological causes. So the sooner we can get to a situation in this country where these protests are no longer happening because people feel that their concerns are being taken seriously, is the way that we're going to ultimately deal with situations like Portland.
Mr. Cohen, the entire senior leadership of DHS at the moment is Senate unconfirmed. The Secretary, the Deputy Secretary, all the Undersecretaries, and some key directors as well. How would that affect the way DHS is currently being run?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big issue. It's very difficult for someone to serve in an acting capacity when it is a senior leadership position. I was an acting undersecretary. You really never know when you're going to be replaced. It's really difficult for one to do any type of long-term planning. I think the other problem, though, with DHS right now is that this White House, more so than any that I've experienced, and I've worked in government during the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration. This White House really seeks to exert control and influence on the day-to-day operations of the department. They have really tried to get the department to be an arm of their political agenda, which, for this administration is building a border wall and immigration enforcement. And in a sense, that has caused morale issues at the department, and it has caused for people to be put in position by the White House who they think will be supportive of their objectives. So it's really difficult for any secretary of DHS, whether they're confirmed or not, to balance the political priorities of an administration with the need to operate in a non-political way. DHS is an operational organization. They have a critically important mission as it relates to preventing terrorist attacks and protecting the nation from a broad range of cyber and physical threats. They can only conduct that mission successfully if the public has confidence that the decisions being made by DHS's leadership are made for non-political reasons, are made based on an objective evaluation of intelligence, are not being driven by any type of political or other biases. And I think it's just it's difficult when you're in an acting capacity and you are very much beholden on the political people in the White House to stay in your position. It's very difficult to maintain that balance.
John Cohen, thanks for having a Fireside Chat.
My pleasure. Nice to be with you.
Meanwhile, this week, the surge in COVID cases in parts of the United States has continued. What's the latest you got for us?
Okay, well, the cases each day have stabilised in the high 60,000s per day for a while now, but of real concern is that those COVID deaths are really starting to climb again. The 7-day average is now well over 1,000 deaths a day, and the last 2 days have been nudging 1,500 deaths a day. These are the highest death numbers we've seen since late May, and we know already the 3 states that are most at fault. California is averaging well over 100 deaths a day now and rising. Florida had over 250 deaths yesterday, with an average racing past 150 a day. And Texas, the last 2 days, has experienced over 300 deaths, with their average now pushing 200 a day and rising. Which is why it was good to see Trump recently taking the corona outbreak seriously. We discussed this last week. He suggested people should wear masks, that people should be careful with social distancing, and his people went out preaching caution.
Some of these states blew through our gated criteria, blew through our phases, and they opened up some of the industries a little too quickly, like bars.
But unfortunately, within a week, Trump was stepping on that message himself.
I really do believe a lot of the governors should be opening up states that they're not opening, and we'll see what happens with them.
And worse still was when, a couple of days ago, he started promoting the views of some rando doctor that were not only banging on about hydroxychloroquine again, but was explicitly telling people don't wear a mask, which had been his message a week ago. Now, I know you talked about her on Wednesday, John.
Dr. Stella Emanuel.
That's the one, but I just want to back over this just for a second. We already knew that she had previously claimed that endometriosis was caused by people having sex in their dreams with demons and witches. That alien DNA is currently used in medical treatments, that scientists are cooking up a vaccine to prevent people from being religious, and that the government is run in part by reptilians and other aliens. But all that is not my biggest concern, believe it or not. It's not. My biggest concern is her response to that very article I just quoted. She tweeted this: "The Daily Beast did a great job summarising our deliverance ministry and exposing incubus and succubus. Thank you, Daily Beast. If you need deliverance from these spirits, contact us." She liked it. She liked all that stuff, and then after giving all that all that publicity, Trump backed over the hydroxychloroquine issue again with this.
Many doctors think it is extremely successful, the hydroxychloroquine, coupled with the zinc and perhaps the zithromycin. But many doctors think it's extremely good, and some people don't. Some people, I think it's become very political.
So many doctors say it works, some don't, and they're the ones who are being political. That is his message, John.
Yeah, I mean, look, it should be frankly disqualifying that a president is tweeting out the medical advice of somebody who is clearly an extremist, somebody who has fringe views that would not be seen as being in the scientific mainstream by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, this whole debate now as to whether states should have reopened as quickly as they did, how much they should be reopening in the next few weeks, it's all swirling around the looming deadline of the summer is nearly over for tens of millions of school kids. Schools and colleges are due to be going back. Are they going to reopen? Can they possibly reopen when you've got 1,500 deaths a day across the United States? This is the big pressure point right now. And of course, without the schools going back, the economy doesn't come back. And when the economy is contracting at a rate in excess of 3% per month at the moment, He's got spot fires all over the place. So there's a certain amount of magical thinking from the president, just as there is from Dr. Stella Emanuel.
That is absolutely true. But I can't emphasise enough how bothered I am by the mixing the message on masks. They've been so far behind on masks. They've basically removed all the other tools they have to fight this because they're not going to do lockdowns anymore or anything like that. Masks is all they got, and they're crapping on it, and that's a real problem for me. I'll tell you why this is so frustrating for me, this whole thing. It's true that according to an AP poll this week, only 32% of people supported Trump's handling of coronavirus. In fact, only 68% Republicans did, which was surprisingly low. But look at this. Between 80 and 90% of Democrats have been at least moderately concerned about a corona outbreak in their area for the entire pandemic. But while Republicans started off concerned, they've now settled at about 30% concerned. Even in the last month, when the outbreak has been making headway in red states, it's made no difference to their attitude whatsoever, and I can't help thinking that might be related to the signals they're getting from their leaders. This week, Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert,
who I think is fair to say is a dingbat.
Yeah.
Technical term?
Yeah, yes, he is.
His colleagues will say that.
Yes. But he's very, very conservative, and he suggested he might have caught COVID because he was wearing a mask. I could not believe that. And this could become an even greater problem when the vaccine comes, because Republicans are already a bit iffy on vaccines, John. Back in 2001, 97% of Democrats and 93% Republicans said it was important for parents to vaccinate their children. By 2015, they dropped 9 points for both of them. But then, by last year, the Dems had gone back up to 92%, and the Republicans had gone down to 79%. If the vaccine comes and the Republicans do not take that vaccine, then America has a big, big problem.
Yeah, and unfortunately as well, it's not just older Americans and Republicans that are concerned about this. Some minority groups, including African American men in particular, have a long historical distrust of vaccinations and some medical practices, and in some cases for good reason. This may or may not make a difference. Businessman and former presidential candidate Herman Cain died earlier today after 3 weeks in hospital suffering from COVID-19. He was 74 years of age. Herman Cain contracted the coronavirus after attending Donald Trump's controversial rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma in late June and refusing to wear a mask, although he was exposed maybe there, maybe somewhere else. We don't know.
We don't know.
You can't isolate these things. But Herman Cain was a vocal supporter of Donald Trump. He appeared at Trump's first presidential rally in 2015. Recently, Herman Cain was downplaying the dangers of COVID-19 while supporting the use of hydroxychloroquine, which of course has been shown to be ineffective against the illness. Here is Herman Cain, though, 9 years ago, when he briefly became the Republican Party's frontrunner for president.
Today, I am announcing that I am running for President of the United States of America. If we believe in God, if we believe in ourselves, and we believe in the United States of America, then we can do great things.
Well, Herman Cain dropped out in around December of 2011, just a month or so after he went to the top of the polls after allegations of sexual harassment. In more ways than that, he was kind of a precursor to Donald Trump. If you look back at his campaign, he was a businessman, anti-Washington, promising to shake things up and provide pretty simplistic solutions. A very interesting political figure at that time. It's tempting to say he deserved what he got. After his public statements, he had a radio show and a big online following where he was kind of a denialist about coronavirus. But, you know, it's tragic that anybody should die of this illness, even someone who didn't just endanger themselves foolishly. And even his friends like Michael Steele, the former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, Michael Steele, described Herman Cain, his friend, as foolish over this whole issue. But the guy didn't deserve to die, and it's very sad to think that others have been taking unnecessary risks as well because they trusted somebody like Herman Cain who should have been, frankly, more responsible, but he's not alone in that irresponsibility.
No, look, there have been some horrible people about this death, and I'm not going to go into details about that, but yeah, bottom line, he didn't deserve to die, and neither does 150,000 other people.
true enough. And that is it for another Fireside Chat. If you missed this week's Planet America, you will find it on iView, Facebook and YouTube now.
And we'll be back at the temporary later time of 9:55 p.m. next Wednesday on ABC TV.
And we'll leave you now with today's funeral for the late civil rights leader, Congressman John Lewis. President Clinton, President Bush were there, so was President Barack Obama. President Trump was not in attendance, but President Obama delivered the eulogy. Good night.
What a gift John Lewis was. We are all so lucky to have had him walk with us for a while and show us the way. God bless you all. God bless America. God bless this gentle soul who pulled it closer to its promise. Thank you very much.